Most people see a man like Dwight Mercer, and they decide everything about him before he opens his mouth. They see the size of him. They see the leather. They see the scars on his knuckles and the gray in his beard, and they cross to the other side of the street. They see danger. They see trouble. They see a man to keep their children away from. But on a gray Tuesday afternoon outside a gas station in Coopers Bend, Tennessee, a 9-year-old blind boy named Eli Hartwell was the only person in that parking lot who could not see Dwight Mercer at all, and he was the only one who walked straight toward him. A man in a pressed golf shirt had just snapped Eli's white cane over his knee and laughed. What that man did not know was that 97 bikers were already on the road behind him, and every one of them was about to hear what he had done. The rain had stopped an hour before, but the sky over Coopers Bend stayed the color of wet concrete. The Gas and Go sat at the bottom of a long hill where Route 11 bent west toward the county line, the last station for 40 miles in either direction. The smell of diesel and old coffee hung in the damp air. A flag with a torn corner snapped against its pole. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed over rows of chips nobody bought anymore, and a radio behind the counter played a country station turned down so low it was more memory than music. This was the kind of place that used to be busy, back when the highway was the only way through. Now most cars took the bypass. Now the Gas and Go mostly waited. Dwight Mercer sat on the curb beside the air pump with his back to the cinderblock wall and his eyes on the road. 58 years old, 6'4", 260 pounds of a man who had spent 40 of those years on a motorcycle. The patches on his cut were faded almost to gray, the largest one across his shoulders reading Iron Disciples, Tennessee. When he had walked in 10 minutes earlier to pay for his gas, the teenage clerk had gone quiet, and the only other customer had suddenly remembered something in her car. Dwight was used to it. He had been riding since dawn out of Knoxville, heading south toward Chattanooga for the funeral of a man he had ridden beside for 30 years. He wanted one thing right now. He wanted 10 quiet minutes and a hot coffee before he got back on the road and finished saying goodbye to his brother. Before we get to what walked into that parking lot, do me a favor. If you believe there's still good left in this world, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, your town, your state, anywhere in the world. I read every single one. Now, back to that curb, and to the boy nobody in Coopers Bend was paying attention to. Because what was about to happen would put a grown man on his knees in the rain. His name was Eli Hartwell, and he was 9 years old. He had been blind since he was 4, when a fever no one caught in time took the last of his sight over the course of a single terrible week. He lived 2 streets up from the Gas and Go with his grandmother, Ruth, because his mother worked the night shift at the regional hospital 40 minutes away, and there was no one else. Ruth had taught him to count his steps. 41 steps from the porch to the corner, 60 more to the crosswalk, 112 to the Gas and Go, where Mr. Okafor behind the counter always saved him the blue raspberry slushie because it was the only thing Eli ever asked for. Eli kept his father's dog tags on a piece of fishing line around his neck, even though he had never met the man because his grandmother said a boy should carry something that belonged to someone who loved him. He walked everywhere with a white cane his mother had saved 3 paychecks to buy, sweeping it left and right the way the man at the clinic had shown him, reading the ground the way other people read a room. On this gray Tuesday, Eli had counted his 112 steps and arrived to buy a slushie with $2 folded into careful quarters in his fist. He was happy. He was humming. He had no idea that a black SUV had just pulled in behind him. The man who climbed out of the SUV was named Brett Calloway, and he owned 3 car dealerships and a great deal of certainty about his place in the world. He was 46, soft in the middle, dressed in a golf shirt the color of a swimming pool and the kind of expensive sneakers a man buys to feel younger. He was on the phone, and he was annoyed. He parked across 2 spaces, the way men park when they have never once been told no. The boy with the cane was standing right where Brett wanted to walk, sweeping that cane in slow arcs across the pavement, and the tip of it tapped, just barely, just once, against the toe of Brett's white sneaker. Brett looked down at the boy the way you look at a thing that is in your way. He told the person on the phone he'd call them back. Then he reached down, took the cane out of the boy's hands before Eli even understood someone was there, put it across his knee, and snapped it in 2 like a dry branch. "Watch where you're swinging that thing," he said. And then he laughed. Eli's hands closed on empty air. He turned in a slow, frightened circle, reaching for the thing that had been his eyes a half-second ago, and it was gone. Where? Where is it? He said, not finishing the sentence, his voice climbing. I need it. Please, I need it. His fingers found nothing. His breath went short and fast. 3 people stood within 20 feet of that boy, the clerk behind the glass, a woman pumping gas at the second island, a man in a delivery truck eating a sandwich. 3 people saw it happen. 3 people looked away. The woman got into her car and pulled the door shut and studied her own steering wheel. The clerk pretended to count something behind the register. The man in the delivery truck took another bite of his sandwich and looked at his phone. And Brett Calloway stepped over the 2 halves of the cane like they were trash and walked toward the door, already lifting his phone back to his ear, because to him, the boy had already stopped existing. Eli dropped to his knees on the wet pavement and began feeling for the pieces. His palms scraped the asphalt. He was making a sound now, a thin, high sound, trying to find the broken halves of the only thing that let him walk home. It's okay, he kept whispering to himself, the way his grandmother whispered it to him. It's okay. I can fix it. I can fix it. He couldn't. The pieces wouldn't fit. The splintered ends would not hold. His hands were shaking and his knees were wet, and he was 112 steps from a home he no longer knew how to reach. He could not count his steps without the cane. He could not read the ground. The whole careful map of his small world had been broken across a stranger's knee in 3 seconds, and the stranger was already gone. Brett's hand was on the door of the station. He paused there, half-turned, and looked back at the boy on his knees in the wet, and something crossed his face that was worse than anger. It was amusement. You'll figure it out, he said to a blind child crawling on the asphalt. Builds character. He pulled the door open. The chime above it sounded bright and ordinary, and the radio inside started a new song, and nobody, not the clerk, not the woman, not the man with the sandwich, nobody moved to help. The boy was alone in a parking lot full of people. That is the part that should make you put your phone down. Not the broken cane. The 4 adults who watched a blind boy crawl and decided it was not their problem. Dwight Mercer set his coffee down on the curb. He did not rush. He never rushed. He rose off that curb slowly, all 6'4" of him unfolding against the cinder block wall. And the woman at the gas pump, who had looked away from the boy, could not look away from him. He crossed the parking lot without a word, his boots quiet on the wet ground, and he did not go to the man. He went to the boy. He lowered himself down onto one knee in front of Eli, this enormous, scarred man folding himself small, and in a voice that none of the people watching would have believed could come out of him, he said something soft. Hey, son, I've got you. Eli froze. A stranger's voice, a huge hand, gentle, closing over his trembling fingers. My cane, Eli whispered. He broke my cane. I don't know how to get home. Dwight gathered the 2 broken halves and pressed them into the boy's hands so he would know they hadn't vanished. He kept his hand over the boy's the whole time. You're not going anywhere alone, he said. You hear me? Not while I'm here. Then he stood and turned and looked at Brett Calloway for the first time. He did not hurry that either. He rose to his full height the way a building rises, slow and inevitable, and the parking lot seemed to get smaller around him. He crossed the distance to the station door with that same unhurried pace, and the slowness of it was worse than any rush could have been, because a man who is in a hurry can be reasoned with, and a man who is not in any hurry at all has already decided. He stopped 6 feet from Brett, close enough that Brett could not pretend he wasn't there, far enough that he had not yet committed to anything. He left the man a door. For a moment, nobody spoke. You broke this boy's cane, Dwight said. It was not a question. Brett turned in the doorway, and his certainty was still fully intact because he had been certain his whole life and nothing had ever made him pay for it. He looked Dwight up and down and decided he was not impressed. He hit me with it, Brett said. Maybe teach the kid to watch where he's going. He smiled the smile of a man who has never once been afraid in a parking lot. You want to make this your problem, biker? You really want to do that today? Dwight didn't answer right away. He looked at the boy on the ground, then back at the man in the pool-colored shirt, and something in his face went very still and very cold. He's blind, Dwight said. 4 people stood in that parking lot now. None of them moved. None of them breathed. The radio inside had stopped between songs, and the only sound was the drip of water off the canopy and a boy crying quietly into a stranger's leg. Brett laughed again, and that laugh was his last real mistake. He laughed and he pulled out his phone and he held it up like a badge. You know what? I know the sheriff in this county personally. We golf. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on your little bike and ride off, or I'm going to make one call and have you arrested for threatening me. Your choice. He took a step closer, emboldened now, the way bullies always read silence as fear. I own half the businesses on that road. I've got lawyers who bill more in an hour than you've made this year. Nobody here is going to take some greasy old. He pressed 3 numbers on his phone. He held it to his ear. He smiled at Dwight the whole time, certain he had won. He was a man who had spent his whole life learning one lesson, that there are no consequences for men like him. And that lesson had never once failed him. Yeah, I need a deputy out at the Gas and Go on Route 11. Got an aggressive vagrant harassing. Dwight did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did something far more frightening than any of that. He bent down slowly and picked his coffee back up off the curb where he'd set it. And he took a sip, and he watched the man make his phone call the way you watch a man dig a hole he intends to stand in. He let Brett finish. He let the threat complete itself. He let the certain man be certain, all the way to the end of his sentence. That's when Dwight smiled. It was not a big smile. It was barely a smile at all. But it changed the temperature of the entire parking lot, and Brett Calloway, certain as he was, felt it and did not understand it. What's funny? Brett asked. Dwight didn't answer. He turned his head slightly, the way a man turns toward a sound he has been waiting for, and far down the long hill where Route 11 bent west, something began to rise. Quiet at first, a low rumble more felt than heard, vibrating up through the wet pavement and into the souls of everyone standing there. Brett lowered the phone an inch. The rumble grew. It became a roar, and then it became a thunder that rattled the chip bags on the racks and made the loose pane in the station door buzz in its frame. Headlights crested the hill, then more than anyone could count. They came down the hill in a column too wide, and they did not stop coming. Chrome caught the gray light and threw it back. Engines you could feel in your teeth. The first riders peeled into the parking lot, and the rest kept pouring over the hill behind them, filling the lot, filling the shoulder of the road, filling the empty spaces of a town that had stopped being full a long time ago. They came in leather darkened by the day's rain, water still beating on their shoulders, beards and gray hair in faded patches, and they kept coming after Brett had already stopped being able to count them. 97 motorcycles. They moved in formation, tight and disciplined, wheel to wheel, and they wheeled into a wide circle around the gas station with a precision that said this was not a mob. This was not chaos. This was a brotherhood that had ridden together for decades and knew exactly where each man's wheel belonged. And then, one by one, the engines died. 97 engines went silent within the space of 10 seconds. The last one ticked as it cooled, and the silence that came after was the loudest thing Brett Calloway had ever heard in his life. Nobody spoke. Nobody got off their bike at first. 97 men simply sat there in the gray afternoon, helmets off now, looking at the man in the pool-colored golf shirt and the boy on the ground, and the weight of all that quiet attention pressed down on the parking lot like a hand. The phone was still against Brett's ear. A tinny voice was asking him to repeat the address. He didn't. The door of the lead bike's rider opened the quiet first. He was older even than Dwight, white-bearded, a road captain's patch on his chest, and he walked through the circle of silent leather like a man crossing his own living room. He did not look at Brett Calloway. He did not acknowledge that Brett Calloway existed. He walked directly to Dwight, and the 2 old men clasped forearms the way brothers do. Got your call from the funeral, Dwight, he said. We were 40 minutes out. What do we got? Dwight didn't speak. He just stepped aside so that the road captain could see the boy. Eli was still on the ground, clutching the 2 halves of his cane to his chest. His face turned up toward all these sounds he could not understand. The engines, the boots, the breathing of 100 men. The old road captain looked down at that blind boy holding his broken cane, and his road-worn face changed into something soft and terrible. He took off his glove. He crouched down. Hey there, partner, he said quietly. What happened to your cane? A man broke it, Eli whispered. He said I hit him. I didn't mean to. I can't see where it is." When he stood back up, he did not look soft anymore. 96 other riders had heard the boy. None of them said a word. Brett Calloway took a step backward and bumped into a wall of leather that had not been behind him a moment ago. He turned. Riders had filled in the space between him and his SUV. He turned the other way. More riders. He was an island in a sea of silent men, and his phone had gone dead in his hand, and the sheriff he golfed with was 19 miles away and did not care. And Brett Calloway finally, for the first time in 46 years, did the math. He lost. "Look," he started. "I think there's been a..." Nobody let him finish. Nobody touched him either. The riders simply opened a single narrow path toward his SUV, and the message in that path was clear. Brett Calloway walked it fast, with his head down, and he got into his car and he drove out of Cooper's Bend, and not one of the 97 men watched him go. He did not deserve to be watched. The justice came 2 weeks later, plain and quiet. The gas station's camera had caught all of it, and a county that did not care about a vagrant cared a great deal about a businessman snapping a blind child's cane on video. And Brett Calloway lost 2 of his 3 dealerships to the lawsuits and the boycotts before the summer was out. But that is not the part of this story that anyone in Cooper's Bend remembers. What they remember is what happened in the parking lot. After. The Iron Disciples did not leave right away. They sat down on the curb beside Eli, the whole brotherhood of them taking turns, and one of them, a younger rider who had been a carpenter before the road got him, took the 2 broken halves of that white cane and a roll of high tensile tape and a length of steel rod from a saddlebag, and he splinted it back together right there, stronger than it had been new. He pressed it into Eli's hands. "Good as new, partner," he said. "Better." And then Dwight Mercer, who had a funeral to get to and a brother to bury, knelt down one more time and walked that boy through every one of the 112 steps home, counting them out loud the whole way, with 96 engines idling slow behind them, like a heartbeat, escorting one 9-year-old boy up 2 streets to a grandmother standing on a porch with both hands pressed over her mouth. Then Dwight climbed back on his Harley. The engines around him fired one by one, 97 of them waking together, and the column pulled back out onto Route 11 and rolled south toward Chattanooga and a grave that was waiting. Eli stood on the porch with his grandmother and turned his face toward the sound, holding his mended cane in both hands, listening to the thunder fade down the hill until the town was quiet again. Mr. Okafor came out from behind his counter that evening and swept the parking lot himself, and where the boy had knelt, he set down a folding chair so that the next time Eli Hartwell walked his 112 steps for a slushie, there would be a place for him to sit. Some people think strength is the ability to frighten others into silence. They think it's the loudest voice, the biggest car, the friend who plays golf with the sheriff. But real strength almost never looks like that. Sometimes it's 97 engines going quiet at once. Sometimes it's a scarred old man on one knee, counting steps out loud so a blind boy won't be afraid of the dark he already lives in. If this story reached you, if you believe that the smallest person in the room is the one worth standing up for, hit that like and share it with someone who needs to remember that nobody is ever truly alone. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, would you have looked away or would you have set your coffee down?